Three. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, whenever you might be catching us. I'm super excited that you are here, whether you are a morning bird or a night owl. I'm happy that you're here joining us for another amazing installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your humble host, Dr. Richard Watkins. The Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. Find out more about the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN, at span-inc.org. That's span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get the proceedings proceeding because we have an amazing guest with us today. We have Dr. Brand Fortner. Professor Fortner is a research professor in physics at North Carolina State University and is considered an expert in accessible scientific visualization and in technical data formats. He previously was chief scientist of the Intelligence Exploitation Group of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, where we worked on video steganography. I should have practiced that before I read it, and other projects for government agencies, and is the founder of two scientific software companies, Spyglass Inc. and Fortner Software LLC. He was listed as one of the country's top technological innovators in 1991 by Discover magazine. That is an incredible bio to have read. Dr. Fortner, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you.
today. What did I leave out in your intro?
That's good.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. We usually have these conversations. It follows the general format where I kind of want to hear a little bit about how Dr. Fortner became Dr. Fortner. Where did you go to undergrad at? Where did you go to graduate school at? And now you're at NC State. Tell me a little bit about your trajectory.
Yeah, so I went to undergraduate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, home of the Fighting Illini. And I was in physics. I was a pretty poor student because I got sidetracked by computers, which were brand new at the time. And I spent a few years after my undergraduate being a computer programmer for various entities across the nation. And then I decided to come back to graduate school, and the University of Illinois offered me a position in programming if I came back to graduate school there, so I did. And got my PhD after 12 years in astrophysics from the University of Illinois. Part of the reason it took me so long is I got sidetracked. Illinois in the mid 90s developed one of the first NSF supercomputer centers. And of course, I was attracted to that. I became their third employee. And so I got sucked into computers yet again. And then I started a couple of software companies. My first software company was successful. The second one crashed and burned. And after that experience, some folks offered to give me a teaching faculty position at North Carolina State University, teaching physics and astronomy. I came down here, and that was 20 years ago. And it's actually been my favorite job to teach astronomy and physics. And I've gotten into public speaking about astronomy in the last decade or so, and that's what I really love to do.
So I heard you speak, and this is how you came to be our
Right.
guest today at the Carolina Science Cafe. Now, the Carolina Science Cafe is, the first Tuesday of every month, and it's always well attended. But your presentation was unique because, I mean, that place was at capacity. I mean, if the fire marshal came
Right.
by, they probably would shut us down. So people are very interested in the question about life off of our planet.
Right.
But let's introduce a term that I thought was really interesting about your talk, and that is the Fermi Paradox. What is the Fermi Paradox? Yeah, what is it? Let's start there.
Yeah, and so most people we have this existential need to know that we're not alone. The way I think about this is you have two choices to pass away. One is you pass away and everybody else on the planet passes away at exactly the same time. And the other is uh, you pass away, but nobody else does. And then people celebrate your life after you pass away. 99.99999% of us want the latter, that we want our lives to mean something and that we want the rest of the world to continue, even though, we're not there uh, after the fact. And the same is true with the thought of there being other aliens. The vast majority of people have this idea that there must be a society of other intelligences out in the galaxy, out in the universe. You ask anybody on the street, are there other intelligences out there? And they'll say, well, of course. There's trillions of stars. There must be other intelligences. Um, I think they're wrong. Okay. I think that, in fact, it's possible that we're the only intelligence, at least in our galaxy, and that's actually a very profound statement. And the profound statement is that if we're the only intelligence, that behooves us to make sure that we survive. That behooves us to make sure that we prevail. And the first person to really express this in the modern era was Enrico Fermi. Enrico Fermi was one of the designers of the Manhattan Project, and he was at Los Alamos in 1950. So this is years after the Manhattan Project. And they were having a lunchtime conversation, one of the most famous lunchtime conversations in history. And in 1950, UFOs were in the air. Remember, Roswell happened in 1947. There had been several instances of people photographed what they thought were UFOs from airplanes. And so everybody's talking about UFOs. And of course, there was UFOs in science fiction. And so people were talking about that. And Enrico Fermi made the following statement. He says, "Where are they?" And everybody laughed and everybody thought he was joking. He was deadly serious. What did Enrico Fermi mean by that statement, "Where are they?" What he meant was the following. There's anywhere between 400 billion to a trillion stars in our galaxy. Our star is about 4.5 billion years old. Our galaxy is a little over 12 billion years old. And so we're a relative newcomer to our galaxy. And so over those 12 billion years of the existence of our galaxy, it's not just trillions of stars, it would be quintillion stars and almost an uncountable number of stars that have evolved and in most cases died over those 12 billion years. And so let's assume that intelligence is not that uncommon. That every once in a while, even if it's one in a billion, even if it's one in a trillion, that over those 12 billion years, there should have been millions to billions of intelligences that arise in our galaxy. And here's the next step that he took. The next step is traveling between stars is incredibly difficult, but not impossible. So let's say that it takes 500 years to travel between stars, which is incredibly um, uh, that's really easy. Okay, I mean, we could send a probe that could travel between the stars in a few hundred years today with our current technology. If you could travel between stars over hundreds of years, over a few million years, you could colonize the entire galaxy. And so here's what Enrico thought. He said that even if it takes one civilization per trillion, over those 12 billion years, there should have been at least one advanced civilization that colonized the galaxy, because it's not impossible. It can be done. And that colonizing the galaxy, once you know how to travel between stars, just takes a few million years, not billion, million years. That clearly did not happen. It did not happen because if our galaxy was humming with life around billions of planets, we would hear it through radio, through light rays, through all sorts of communication. And our galaxy is silent.
Hmm.
You know, people, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is looking for intelligence, but they're looking for single sources, single stars that might have an intelligence. But Enrico Fermi said, if we're talking millions to billions of civilizations, one of them should be colonizing. And that didn't happen.
Enrico Fermi seems like a odd person to be asking this question because it seems as though he's asking the question and he may be doubting whether or not there is technologically advanced life in our solar system while in parallel working on a technology that can eradicate life.
Yes.
He feels like the strangest person to be asking that question.
Well, I mean, to be fair, he wasn't really a bomb designer. What he was responsible for the first nuclear reactor at the University of Chicago, and so he was a nuclear physicist. He was very interested in the physics of that. He's when you look at just the field of theoretical physics, he's one of the top dozen greats of the 20th centuries that helped us understand quantum mechanics at a fundamental level. But yeah, I agree. You
Yeah.
know, we see that dichotomy. You know, before the Manhattan Project, physicists were eggheads nobody heard about, and after the Manhattan Project, you know, we've discovered evil. So
Um, so going back to the doubt that there is um technologically advanced life, let's I guess define what we mean by technologically advanced. I mean, from a technological standpoint, if we're talking about technological advancement, we are different now than we were when Enrico Fermi was asking that question. So, how are we defining technologically advanced civilization?
yeah, that's a good question, and that question was answered by Francis Drake, by Professor Drake. I keep on wanting to call him Francis Drake, Frank Drake, a astronomer from the 1960s. And Drake created what we now call the Drake equation. And the Drake equation was a way of trying to figure out how many advanced civilizations there are in our galaxy. And what he did was he said instead of just taking the number of just making a random guess, let's break down this unknown into a series of factors. And the way I try to explain this is the University of Chicago had a question on their qualifying exam. The question was, how many piano tuners are there in Chicago? Well, you can approach this in two ways. One way is you just make a random guess. And the other way is try and break that question that you have absolutely no idea about into a series of parameters. And so, how many piano tuners are there in Chicago? You break that down into how many people live in Chicago? What percentage of the people that live in Chicago own a piano? You know, and so that gives you the approximate number of pianos in Chicago. How often does a piano have to be tuned? How long does it take to tune it? How many pianos can a tuner tune in a year? Break that down, and you get an answer that's within an order of magnitude of the real answer. And that's what they were looking for in the qualifying exam. Professor Drake did exactly the same thing. He took the number of technological civilizations in our galaxy and broke it down to, well, how many stars are there in the galaxy? How many stars have planets? How many of those planets are what's known as the habitable zone, where you can potentially have life? How many of those, what percentage of those have evolved life? What percentage of those have evolved advanced life, such as us? And what percentage of those with advanced life have become technological? His definition of a technological civilization is a civilization that can transmit information over interstellar distances. And that's an operational definition. So theoretically, you could have intelligent civilizations that decide they didn't want to talk to the rest of the universe. We human beings have been a technological civilization for over 100 years, because when we started broadcasting radio waves, those now can reach interstellar distances. And so that's his definition. Again, it's a nice definition because it's operational.
So yeah, and also it seems to base this concept. Again, we're talking to Dr. Brand Fortner, North Carolina State University. Thank you so much. So, but it's based on communication, so that's a really important part. What So before our discovery of the radio wave and our leveraging it for communication, we wouldn't have defined ourselves as technologically
Technological.
advanced.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And also, now this might seem like a, a dumb question because you kind of already touched on it when you were talking about our need to understand, life for, our own personal validation. But I think one of the questions are it might be simple for there not to be life, but what does it mean? And what is the next step, hypothetically, if we send a radio signal out and, we get we get that information back that there is in fact technologically advanced life in our galaxy. What is the next step? I'm not saying that there is
Right.
because there's a lot of evidence and there's no evidence that there is, right? So I get that. But my question is from somebody who talks about it and thinks about it, what do we do when we find technologically advanced life? What is the next step? Should we be afraid? Yeah, I don't know what the next steps are if we find something.
Yeah. So there's a lot of physicists, Stephen Hawking most famously, who said, yeah, we shouldn't be talking to them. And in fact, a famous physicist made a point of saying that the danger with a technological civilization is if you look at meetings of civilizations on Earth, human civilizations, when there's a wide disparity in the technological level of that meeting, it does not end well. It never ends well for the less technologically advanced. And many physicists are making the point that the advanced civilization we communicate with doesn't have to be evil in any way. We just might not be able to have that conversation. I mean, imagine trying to ask a squirrel to navigate between the stars. I mean, you can't have that conversation. Um, and I think this is made most famously in the famous science fiction trilogy called The Three Body Problem, and specifically the second book in that trilogy called The Dark Forest, where they say that the Dark Forest is an old story where if you're a hunter in the forest, if you start shooting at other people, that's no good because then everybody knows where you are. And so the best bet is to just stay silent. Okay. Now, what happens if we do discover absolute proof of advanced civilizations? I don't know. I think it's interesting to speculate, and certainly NASA does have a group of a post-contact task force that's supposed to have protocols for that. But what I've noticed is the following, is that if you look at science fiction from the 1950s to the 1960s, look at the movie 2001. They didn't want to tell the population because they thought it would disrupt civilization dramatically. People would go screaming in the streets and, rioting and whatnot. We are so embedded in aliens. We live in a sea of aliens day in and day out that I think if we discovered proof of aliens, I personally think the response would be, oh, okay, that's nice. I don't think you're going to see the worldwide panic that we assumed would happen. I think that it would just be yet another alien. Oh, these happen to be real instead of not. But I don't think that will ever happen for reasons that we'll be talking about in the next few minutes.
All right, so let's go there. Let's talk about why you don't feel that there is technologically advanced life out there in our galaxy. And also, I know we take it for granted. I am ignorant on so much, and it is the case that every last one of these podcasts, whether it's you or another expert, reveals just how very little I know about any particular subject. So let's back up just a smidgen. When we say galaxy, how are we defining galaxy when we say universe, when we say solar system? I know these are basic terms from for you,
Right.
but I remember the questions that you received at the Science Cafe. It felt as though people might have at times been confused when you use the word galaxy, solar system,
Right.
universe.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so one of the problems we have when we teach astronomy and talk about astronomy with people is a sense of scale. And you can't wrap your heads around the distances that we're talking about. And so I'm going to throw out numbers, but those numbers are just going to wash over you. But it's all we've got here. So just like our body is broken up into organs, and those organs are broken up into cells. Okay. So there's this hierarchy of stuff, and if we go higher, the humans are broken up into tribes and then broken up into cities and countries. So there is a hierarchy in the universe too. Our universe was created 13.7 billion years ago. And our universe is made fundamentally of what's known as galaxies and stars. A star is our sun. Our sun is a star. There's about a trillion of those puppies. Most stars are organized in what we call galaxies. A galaxy, the most common type of galaxy is something that looks just like a pinwheel. In fact, that's exactly the galaxy we live in. Our galaxy is called the Milky Way galaxy. Our galaxy contains anywhere from 400 billion to a trillion stars. And it's 100,000 light years across. And what do I mean by 100,000 light years? What I mean by that is we can't measure distances in kilometers or miles because the numbers are just too big. And so we measure big distances in terms of how long how long light takes to travel that distance. So, for example, for me to travel, if I'm light, to travel from the Earth to the moon, it's about 1.3 seconds. Okay. For light to go from the sun to the Earth is 8.3 minutes. So we are 8.3 light minutes away from the sun. A Neptune, the farthest planet, is several light hours. Okay. Several light hours. And so now you got some sense that the inner solar system is light minutes, the outer solar system is light hours. Well, so how far away are stars from each other? Well, the closest star to our star is Alpha Centauri, or actually Proxima Centauri, which is approximately 4 light years. Okay, 4 light years. So it takes light 4 years to go there. And how does that relate to the distance from here to the moon? Well, there's several million seconds in a year. So there'd be dozens of millions of times farther to the nearest star than to the moon. Okay, so that will give you some sense of scale. So if the nearest star to us is 4 light years, and then we talk about our galaxy about 100,000 light years across. And if I sent a signal at one end of the galaxy saying, "Hi, how are you doing?" It would take 100,000 years for that signal to reach the other side of the galaxy, and for that person to say, "Well, I'm doing pretty well. How are you?" And that signal coming back, it would be 200,000 years round trip. And there's no way to break that. And so when I or Dr. Drake talk about extraterrestrials, we only ever talk about our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, because other galaxies are millions of light years away or billions of light years away. And so, if I tried to communicate with a galaxy a billion light years away and it's a 2 billion year round trip, this is before humans existed, before, mammals existed, before complex life existed. So it just doesn't make any sense. And so that's why everybody only talks about just our galaxy.
Thank you so much for breaking that down. And if you're out there and you're curious and you're trying to figure out how many miles can light travel in 1 second, that's around 186,000 miles in 1 second. So when
That's
you're
right.
hearing Dr. Brand talk about a year, just know that is how fast that light is traveling. And also, by the way, light is the fastest thing that we are aware of. So if you're out there just curious
No,
about
I'm
that.
sorry. It's a little stronger than that.
Ooh,
It's the
go ahead.
that number, 300,000 kilometers a second, is the fastest that any information can ever travel in the universe, bar none. No information can ever travel faster than that. End of story. Full stop.
Mm. And so now let's go ahead. Now that we have kind of scales and stuff kind of laid down, now let's unpack the argument regarding the lack of technologically advanced life here
Right.
in our not our solar system, but in our galaxy.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that you talk to someone in the street, they will say, well, there's trillions of stars. Of course, that just statistically, there must be advanced life out there. What they're implicitly saying, although they don't actually say it, is they're invoking the Copernican principle. The Copernican principle is named after Nicholas Copernicus, who was in the 15th century, came out with the theory that the Earth is not the center of the universe. He proposed that the sun is the center of the universe and that the Earth was just one of many planets that orbit the sun. This was very controversial. Several people were burned at the stake for making statements like that. But it turns out to be true. And then we discovered that yes, the sun is the center of the universe. Oh, wait, the sun is not the center of the universe. That we're in the Milky Way galaxy and we're not at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. We're out in the suburbs of the Milky Way galaxy. And hey, the Milky Way galaxy isn't the center of the universe either. And so every time as we get to understand more and more about the universe, we discover that we're less and less special. And so the Copernican principle is named after Copernicus, that we are not special. There's nothing special about us. And if there's nothing special about us, that means statistically there should be a lot of people like us. Problem. That's not valid. And what I mean by that is we have to go what's known as the weak anthropic principle, also known as survivorship bias. The weak anthropic principle says we live in a universe that looks like it was created for our existence, because if it wasn't created for our existence, we wouldn't be here to have this conversation. In other words, everything has to line up perfectly to create humans. And so let me give you an example to show you that. You have 65,000 people in a room. You give them all coins, ask them to flip. 32,000 will flip heads, the rest will flip tails. Of the 32,000 that flipped heads, you ask them to flip. 16,000 will flip heads a second time, 8,000, 4,000, and so on and so forth. So after 16 flips, one person would have flipped heads 16 times. What are the chances of that next person flipping heads? That's a question.
50%.
Right, exactly 50%. In other words, he has been incredibly lucky. And if it wasn't for him, it'd be somebody else. But he is standing there saying he flipped heads 16 times, because if he hadn't flipped heads 16 times, he wouldn't be standing there. But just because he's lined up those 16 times doesn't give him any preferential treatment for the next flip. Okay. So there's a book that came out a few years ago called Rare Earth that looked at all of the incredible coincidences that are required for our existence. The fact that we've had a sun that's been incredibly stable for 5 billion years. Most stars are not that stable. That we have large outer planets, Jupiter and Neptune, Jupiter and Saturn, that protect us from asteroids and comets for the most part. I mean, other than that little instance 66 million years ago. The fact that we have a moon that's much, much larger than you would expect, that stabilizes the Earth's tilt and keeps our climate stable. By the way, we have knowledge of at least 6,000 different solar systems that contain planets other than our solar system. Not one of them looks anything like our solar system. As far as we know, the configuration of our solar system is unique. You look at all of the other things, the fact that we're in the suburbs. If we were farther out or closer in our galaxy, we couldn't support life. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these parameters, any one of which changed even the slightest, and we wouldn't have us. I mean, take that asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, or the non-avian dinosaurs, I'm sorry, the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Without that impact, we would not be here. So, um, if any of those had changed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We're exactly like the person that flipped 16 times. And so the Copernican principle is not valid. We can't say that just because we exist, that by definition, other things should exist. I mean, look at our planet, for example. Our planet has been around 4.5 billion years. I mean, it was destroyed once and then it was recreated. Small detail. If we look at evidence for life, we find evidence for life just a few 100 million years after the creation of the planet, about when the planet is cooled enough that we could have liquid water on the surface. Um, but the kind of life that you think of as life, bugs that crawl around, plants, things like that, that didn't happen until 500 million years ago. I mean, it took 3.5 billion years to go from the simplest life to complex life. And it took another 500 million years to get to us, 4.5 billion years to get to us. Okay. And so that implies that even complex life is extremely difficult, that it takes so long. And almost no stars are stable for that long. I mean, we have a very, very unique star. Stars that are less massive than ours last a much longer time, but they're very unstable. They have these solar flares that tend to sterilize their planets. Stars that are even a little bit bigger than ours don't last 5 billion years. They last just a few billion years. And stars bigger than that last just a few million years. So we're a Goldilocks and a Goldilocks and a Goldilocks and a Goldilocks. Another example, our star has increased its luminosity by 20% over its lifetime. But our planet, mostly through what life has been able to do to modify our climate, has been able to keep the surface of our planet habitable over those 4 billion years, specifically through the carbon cycle and through plate tectonics. Without either of those, without plate tectonics, without the carbon cycle, our planet would have been sterilized, either gotten too hot or too cold. And so we have this built-in thermostat system. And, where did that thermostat system come from? Well, if that thermostat system didn't exist, we wouldn't be here to have this discussion. Okay. And so just because we're here doesn't give us any evidence at all for the existence of other technological civilizations.
Right. Just because an anomaly exists and there are opportunities for that anomaly to repeat itself, it doesn't mean that that anomaly will repeat itself. Right.
Right.
Okay, yeah. I mean that makes perfect sense because I mean just because from a statistical standpoint there are opportunities for situations to occur again. There are observances that are one of one and
Right.
perhaps
There's this.
we're the one of one. I don't even know how. Anyway, I'm gonna cut you off because I know you're heading in a direction of providing us more proof. I'm gonna hush up. I'm gonna mute my microphone. Yes, but please continue to tell us about how special we truly are.
Well, there's this wonderful cartoon I love, where there's a guy with the firing squad, and there's dozens of soldiers sitting there, and he says, "All of you missed, because if you didn't all miss, I wouldn't be here to tell you that you all missed." Okay, and that's the point we're in. That the weak anthropic principle. Now, cosmologists hate the weak anthropic principle. They hate it with a passion because a cosmologist wants reasons for why the universe exists and why the laws of physics exist the way they do, and they want reasons for stuff. The people that love the weak anthropic principle, such as myself, say, well, the laws of physics are exactly the way they are because if they were any different, we wouldn't be here to have this discussion, which is a true argument. It's just a very unsatisfying argument because it doesn't have reason. Okay. But we have to take that into account, that the weak anthropic principle says our existence doesn't help us when we're trying to estimate the number of aliens out there.
So, when you get around your colleagues at conferences or happy hours, and you have a colleague with an opposing view to your own, what
Right.
are some counterpoints that you hear them raise when they listen to your points of view?
They say, well, there's trillions of stars out there. Certainly one of them should have developed civilization. You know, that you have to understand that these are conversations without a lot of data. I mean, we have a sample size of one here. And so we just have to speculate. One of the ways we speculate is look at solutions of the Fermi paradox. And there's hundreds of those solutions. So there's a group of people called Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which I should mention. There's a lot of money that's put behind the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but not a dime of taxpayer money. That there was a law passed many years ago making that illegal. And so, but there's been a lot of private money that's put into that. A lot of private money because most of us have a deep philosophical, almost a religious need to feel that we're one of many, that we're part of a conversation. Um, and so in that search, what they're saying is we just have not looked hard enough. Uh, the problem with that is the Fermi paradox, that maybe you haven't looked hard enough, but you're assuming that no advanced civilization ever colonizes. Because if they do, they will take over the entire galaxy in a few million years. There's other people that say that perhaps the galactic civilization has decided to put us under quarantine. Okay, that's another popular solution. The problem with that solution is that quarantines always have leakage, and we haven't seen any of the any signs of any sort of communication. By the way, I should mention that until recently, most of SETI was looking for radio signals. Nowadays, we're also looking for laser signals because, I mean, we're transitioning from radio communication to laser communication too, and we would expect advanced civilizations to do that. But, when it comes to communication, electromagnetic radiation, be it radio waves, light waves, X-rays, gamma rays, infrared, ultraviolet, we know all of those. And our communication over interstellar distance has to be one of those ways. There's no other way to do it. And we just don't see evidence of that.
Yeah, I know. I completely understand. And another thing that you were mentioning, and I thought this was really interesting, was, and please correct me when I get the term incorrect, but the great filter, because
Yes,
one of the questions that could come up is, what if we are that colonizing civilization? Um, where are we, right? Are we going to colonize or not? Talk about the great filter. I think I might be misunderstanding it. So break it down for me and any other
sure.
lost souls out there.
Yeah. So before I talk about the Great Filter, let me talk about the Kardashians. Um, and actually, I'm mispronouncing that. It's called the Kardashev scale.
Okay.
The Kardashev scale is the way of categorizing interstellar technological civilizations. What the Kardashev says, obviously a Russian, that civilizations can be broken down into three levels: type 1, type 2, type 3. A type 1 civilization is a civilization that uses all the energy that arrives on their home planet from their star. By that definition, we're a type zero point 0.7. We use about 70% of the energy that hits our planet. A type 2 civilization is a civilization that uses most of the entire energy that star produces. A type 2 civilization presumably would have to have some sort of device that encloses the entire star to absorb its energy. That thing that encloses the star is sometimes called a Dyson sphere, because Freeman Dyson, another famous physicist of the 20th century, proposed this, and that you could actually try and look for free Dyson spheres in the galaxy and actually in the universe, because it would have a very distinctive spectral signature. That's type 2. A type 3 civilization is a civilization that uses the energy of an entire galaxy. And so you could restate the Fermi Paradox as there are no type 3 civilizations in our galaxy. And in fact, recently, astronomers have looked at other galaxies, because if other galaxies had been completely colonized, they would have a very unique spectral signature. And obviously, no galaxy that we've observed has a type 3 signature. Okay. And so the Great Filter says, is there a reason why no civilization reaches type 3 or even type 2? And what they postulate is that every civilization has challenges. I mean, for us, one of the challenges would be the asteroid impact. Another challenge would have been a snowball Earth. Another would have been the Permian Jurassic extinction event, and so on and so forth. That there are all these challenges that you have to overcome. It's like flipping the coin 16 times. Okay. Um, and so let's propose two scenarios. Scenario number one is there exists a great filter that prevents us from becoming type 3, to prevents us from colonizing the entire galaxy. And that great filter is something that we haven't gotten to yet. Maybe that great filter is nuclear war. Maybe that great filter is genetic drift. I don't know. Something like that. Um, then you would, and that would be bad news. That would mean that our civilization will have a big flash in the pan now, but we're not going to be around that much longer. The great filter will kill us off. And that's why there's nobody has taken over the galaxy. In that scenario, if there are other technological civilizations, we should see them. In other words, there should be a flock of civilizations that are aiming towards dominating the galaxy, but we all hit the same great filter and we all die off. And that great filter is the solution to the Fermi paradox. Here's the thing. Perhaps the great filter is something that we have already passed. Perhaps that great filter would have been snowball Earth. Perhaps that great filter would have been asteroid impacts. Perhaps that great filter would have been the start of plate tectonics. Who knows? Um, if the great filter is something that we as human beings have already passed through, then that means we have a chance of becoming that type 3 civilization. We have the chance of dominating our galaxy, of being that civilization that survives and thrives and prevails and find meaning and purpose in the cosmos. So here's the thing about the great filter theory. If we find other technological civilizations out there, the implication is the great filter is ahead of us, not behind us. So, from a philosophical point of view, we would prefer that we not find that there are not other technological civilizations out there, that we have already passed the greatest challenges that any civilization ever faces. We've already gone through those filters, and that we do have a chance of taking the galaxy by storm.
Yeah, I would. I don't want to say that I'd agree with that, but I think that's really interesting
Right.
for two reasons. The first reason is that you said, I believe, Dr. Stephen Hawking's said that we should not want a response.
Yes.
Um, and obviously, what you mentioned is that anytime two civilizations meet and one is technologically inferior to another, it doesn't work out for the technologically inferior civilization. Another being, if we do have a response back, we're on the wrong end of the great filter. So those are two reasons that we shouldn't want a response back.
Right.
An interesting piece here that I think is interesting for us when when we're laying out those levels. So we're harnessing all of the energy of our galaxy, all of the energy of our closest star, which is I believe level 2, and where we are right now, level 1, where we're utilizing it. Um, I think where we are right now is unique because with our breakthroughs of nuclear fusion, we might have the capacity. Now, this might be far in the future, or maybe not that far in the future, to create our own star. I don't know where that fits in, where you have a civilization that creates its own star. Um, and then also, we've also managed to create separate intelligence that might be
Right.
superior in short order. So I just don't know where that now puts us on the scale of things. We, I don't know, because yeah. Anyways,
So when we're talking about trying to look at the future, the way I like to think about it is that there's two time frames. So let's say that you go to a World War One pilot, and you ask that World War One pilot, what is aviation going to look like in 100 years? And they'll get some things right and some things wrong. You know, they're not going to be able to predict the cramped seats and problems with Wi-Fi in the flights, but they are going to be able to predict that flight will be able to be used for long distance transport of people and things, and that millions to millions of people use it every year. So and so if you explain to this World War One pilot what aviation looks like today, they would have some surprises, but they would be able to comprehend what you say. Now let's go to Aristotle. It would be hard to have that conversation. Okay. It's just too difficult. And so the only way to have a conversation with Aristotle about flight is not really talk about airplanes, but talk about being able to move people and things rapidly and being able to have that discussion of what implications would that have for society. So when we're talking about advanced technology, we have to kind of make that same shift that when we're talking about technology thousands or tens of thousands, 100,000 years in the future, we can't extrapolate. We can't say, what are the spaceships of the future like? We have to downshift to the fundamental laws of physics that will be the same now as they will in 100,000 years. Okay. And so you say we can make our own star. I don't see that we can do that. but there are no laws of physics that would prohibit that. There are laws of physics that prohibit it from communicating faster than the speed of light, for example. And so that is an absolute that will never change. Um, but we will have, in thousands of years, technology that for us will be indistinguishable from magic, to use Arthur C. Clarke's most famous phrase. So the question is, I've been talking about humans. 100,000 years from now, will there be humans? We don't know. What about human intelligence? What about human civilization that transcend what we call humanity, meaning the physicality of our biological being? And this is another potential solution to the Fermi Paradox, is that greatly advanced civilizations have transcended physicality and they become pure information. And certainly there's been a lot of science fiction stories based on that. The problem is, even if you're a disembodied intelligence, you still have to communicate. And to communicate, you still have to use the laws of physics. And the laws of physics say to communicate over interstellar distances, your only choice is electromagnetic radiation. So even disembodied intelligences would have to use electromagnetic radiation, and we should be able to intercept that.
Man, this is absolutely incredible. Again, Dr. Brand Fortner, North Carolina State University. Um, this is kind of the gift and the curse. I have the most amazing conversations that anyone should be able to have. There's no reason
Right.
why I should be able to have these conversations once a week with incredible thinkers across the country, but I am, and I'm very grateful. But the curse is at the end of the conversation, I end up kicking myself because I should have asked this or I should have asked that. And you might have been preparing me to hear something that you never heard. So I've started polishing off or finishing off conversations like this. Dr. Fortner, what question should I have asked? Ask it and then provide the answer.
One question you should have asked is, how long do we have to be a technological civilization?
Let's go. How long do we have to be a technologically advanced civilization?
I'm really glad you asked that question. So let's go back to the Drake equation, which broke down the number of technological civilizations in our galaxy. And he had a bunch of parameters, the number of stars, the number of planets, the chance that a star is habitable, the chance that life developed, and so on. The last parameter in the Drake equation is the average lifetime of technological civilizations. And that turns out to be by far the most important parameter in the entire Drake equation. If that says that civilizations only last a few hundred years, then there's essentially no intelligent life in our galaxy, just using the Drake equation and using reasonable estimates for all of those parameters. And so for having a hope that there's a lot of technological civilizations in our galaxy, the hope is that technological civilizations last a very long time. Well, so we have a sample size of one, our civilization. Can you make any statistical arguments based on a sample size of one? And it turns out you can. And the way you do that is through what's known as the doomsday calculation. And this is based off of the book of the same name, the doomsday calculation. And the most famous example in the doomsday calculation is trying to figure out how many German tanks there are in World War II. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One way is you send out intelligence agents and you spy on on the Soviet, not the Soviet, on the Germans and try and figure it out. And they did that. And they came up with estimates. The other way is the Germans, being Germans, put unique and sequential serial numbers on their tanks. And the Allies captured one German tank and it had a serial number. And that serial number was, for example, 42. So we have a sample size of one. So based on that sample size of one, the Allies came up with an estimate of the number of tanks that the Germans had. And that estimate turned out to be wildly more accurate than the intelligence estimates. So what did they do with that serial number? Well, they said that serial number must not be unique. By unique, they said it's not at the beginning of the serial numbers and it's not at the end. So there's not 43 German tanks because that would put 42 at the very end. And there's not 3,000 German tanks because that would put 42 at the beginning. That 42 is just a normal, not unusual number. And so they estimate that the number of German tanks was of the order of 100, whereas the intelligence estimates had said a couple thousand. And it turned out that the number of actual tanks was like 93. I mean, it was, and this happened throughout the entire war. And so the doomsday calculation says even with a single number, statistically assume that single number is nothing special, you can come up with an estimate. And so now let's look at how long will we be technological? Well, there have been 100 billion human beings that have ever lived on the planet, since we became a species 100,000 years ago. 100 billion people. And so the question is, how long will we survive? You can say, well, that 100 billion is just a normal number. And so by using the doomsday calculation, we say, on average, we should survive for another 100 billion people. Well, based on current estimates, that 100 billion people will be for the next 790 years because our population continues to increase. So the doomsday calculation says we have only 790 years ahead of us. And if that number is anywhere near accurate, then even the Drake equation says we're alone in the galaxy. Okay. Now, I mean, that is a very statistical argument. And you could make a different argument. You could say instead of counting the number of humans, you count the time that humans have been around, which is 100,000 years. And by that estimate, you could say we have at least 100,000 years ahead of us. Take your pick. But, if we're talking about humans, it's not clear to me that we, as a recognizable species that can interbreed, is going to be around 100,000 years from now. Either evolution or just genetics is going to turn us into something else. That might not be a bad thing, but it's something we have to think about.
Yeah, you had mentioned genetic drift earlier. That's just
Right.
something where something changes over time because genetics, incorporate single nucleotide polymorphisms over time.
Right.
Um, so Dr. Fortner, thank you so very
Sure.
much. I'm going to actually look at it like we only have 790 years. Let's Yeah, let's take advantage of every single moment of every single second that we have, and let's treat every single person that we meet just a little bit better and keep our fingers crossed that even though we are preparing for 790 years, we've got 100,000 years left, right? So we'll look at it like that. Dr. Brand Fortner, thank you so much for being with us
Sure.
today. I really, really appreciate it. This is a great conversation. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being willing to be on the Richard Watkins podcast.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Excellent. Each and every one of you, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. And remember that the future is not something to wait for, it is something to build. Until next time, take care.